Greetings, people of Earth. Welcome back. My name is Jax, and today we are going to discuss Chapter 16 of the Tao Te Ching, Returning to Origin. I think we all have been educated enough to understand the idea of like the water cycle, the life cycle. We talk a lot about cycles and how things end up coming back to the beginning so that they can start again. And Taoism is no exception to this. Taoism definitely involves the idea of returning to the origin. A lot of people like to think of Tao as, the universe. Some people refer to Tao as God. Some people refer to Tao as just the energy that exists amongst all things. And whatever your definition of Tao is, it very much relies on this whole idea of returning from where we came from, and wherever that energy came from, it returns to it, it goes back, it starts again, it renews. Many Eastern religions have this idea of reincarnation or cycles. Yin and yang are, in a perpetual cycle. They're always spiraling each other. There's a little bit of each of them in one another, and so, you get this idea of returning to the origin, returning to where you've come from. And I think that's a very peaceful and enjoyable idea that, one day we all return to wherever we came from. We don't know where that is. We might not be able to remember where exactly that was, but we all return. So I'm going to read the thing and then we will talk about it. Returning to origin. Achieve a state of total emptiness. Preserve a perfect stillness. The myriad elements of creation rise and grow, and I watch them repeat their endless cycle. Diverse and varied, everything returns to its origin. This return to origin is what we mean by perfect stillness. Thus, perfect stillness is defined as a return to the natural state. The return to the natural state is called constancy. Understanding constancy is called enlightenment. Not understanding constancy leads to chaos and danger. To understand constancy is to be tolerant. Tolerance leads you to fairness. Fairness leads you to completeness. Completeness leads you to the celestial. The celestial leads you to the Tao. The Tao leads you to the eternal. And in the eternal, death holds no fear or danger. So, first of all, apologies for my inability to say constancy. But I think this is something we all kind of innately know, and it's interesting, especially if you hang out with very young people or very old people, you kind of begin to see that they are very similar in a lot of ways. I think our beginning and end of the human life cycle have a lot in common. We're frail, we are weak, but yet worldly in some strange sense. Like if you hang out with little kids, you know that, little kids seem to see the world in a really interesting way. And then when you hang out with, maybe your grandparents or your family friends or things like that, you learn to realize that those people also see the world in a really interesting way. And there can be a lot of wisdom in both sides of the human experience on the extreme ends, the very young and the very old. And so you start to see that, we all eventually return to where we've come from. A tree eventually falls down and returns. If you've seen The Lion King, you know that, when an animal passes away, it is it disappears into the grass, and then the animals eat the grass, and, it is a perfect cycle. And that is how life on Earth has had to develop and evolve in so many ways. It has to be this cycle of energy getting transferred and reverted back to where it came from. And that in itself is quite an interesting thing to sort of come to terms with and realize, like, oh, one day I will join that cycle. One day I will revert back to all of these other elements and chemicals, and who knows where my soul goes? Who knows where my energy goes? I know a lot of people have some strong opinions on this, hence the religions of the world. But this returning to origin can be very peaceful. And that's why I think one of the things that it said, like the last line, it says, "And in the eternal, death holds no fear or danger." Because if we were something before we existed on this planet, which is sort of what Taoism postulates, if we were something before, we will return to that. Whatever we were before, we return to that. And if it's nothing, or if it's some kind of energy thing, or the fifth dimension, or I don't know what it is, but it's very peaceful in knowing that wherever we came from, we are going to return to it. We always come home, no matter what home is. And I find that very peaceful, and I think it's really neat that, many thousands of years ago, these Taoist theologians or Taoist scholars or philosophers, they thought the same thing. They realized that this return to origin, this return to peace and tranquility, was in fact extremely peaceful, gratifying. It's good to know. I'm happy to know that that is what, if that's what's in store for me, then that's amazing. I also want to touch on this idea of stillness. They talk a lot about the stillness and how stillness is this peaceful return to origin. In Taoism, there's a lot of talk about movement and the lack of movement. So, for example, the grass you see on here, or the branches you see behind me, are flexible, and they move with the wind. They move with the current. They understand the situation that they're in, and they understand that if they're rigid, they're just going to fall down and crack and break. And so flexibility gets this association in Taoism with being able to bend, being able to accommodate the things that life throws at you, the difficulties and the strains. But stillness is a little bit different, because anxiety or that kind of thing causes movement, right? Like it causes this like unsuredness. Maybe you bite your nails, maybe you sort of, but the stillness of a pond is peace. It is the understanding that things are going to work out regardless. It is that calm, quiet voice in the back of your head telling you that everything will be okay. And so it's really interesting that Taoism talks about the benefits of movement and flexibility and being able to bend, and the movement of water rushing, how water flows through a creek. There's a lot of movement involved, and that's all positive in Taoism. But stillness can also be very positive. And it's interesting that it talks about stillness instead of something like rigidity or that kind of thing. Because in Taoism, being rigid and unable to break, like a stone, it might mean that you're, a pretty tough person. But at some point, you're going to come into contact with something that is more rigid than you are. If you are a stone, there's always hammers out there that can break you into a billion pieces. And so by being flexible, by being able to go with the flow and move with the current of the wind or of the water, gives you a lot of freedom. And yet, having said all of that, Taoism is also comfortable enough to talk about the stillness and how to cultivate stillness within you, and how to cultivate the stillness that you require to just be able to breathe, just exist. And it is that stillness in this verse that brings this peace, and it's this understanding that I will return to wherever I came from. In 100 years, none of this is going to matter. I have found peace in that. I have found stillness in that. And I think that is just a very beautiful concept. It's something that is difficult to cultivate within yourself, but as a Taoist, it is really important to cultivate that. And I find myself often in situations where I feel a lot of anxiety or stress, or what are my family going to think? What are my friends going to think? Oh my gosh, I've screwed up, whatever. And thankfully, this still, quiet voice in my head goes, you know what, Jack? In 100 years, very few people are going to be around that remember you. In 100 years, very few things that are familiar to you will exist. You know, these trees might still be here, but they will be very different. They will not look like this. They will not behave this way. Many of their descendants will have taken over the earth. You know, they will have seeded and fostered new forests all over. And so worrying about this very specific situation that you're worried about that is causing you to move frantically and to feel anxiety is really a waste of your effort. It's a waste of your energy. And at some point you will just return to this whole cycle. And the problems that you face today will be so insignificant that you will not remember them in the future. And that is what true stillness and cultivating that peace inside of you, that's why Taoists are so powerful and peaceful in this regard, is that they understand that one day I will return, and that is so okay. If I have to be incredibly honest with you, the last two lines of this are incredibly true, especially for me. The Tao leads you to the eternal, and in the eternal, death holds no fear or danger. I genuinely believe that if you are a true Taoist and you understand, you know, what the Tao Te Ching is offering and telling you, that you don't fear what comes after. You really don't. And I know many of us struggle with like the fear of losing our loved ones, the fear of losing ourselves, but really coming to terms with these concepts and understanding life through the philosophical lens of Taoism, I really believe that it allows you to sort of let go of those fears and just to say, you know what, in 100 years, I am going to return to wherever I came from, and I am so looking forward to that return. So that's all I'm going to say for today. Thank you so much for listening. I would love to hear your comments on returning to origin, what you think, the Taoist philosophy, anything, any comments or questions you have. Thank you so much. And as always, I will talk to you guys tomorrow.